Alice started working in a home where every day she faced the cold, judgmental gaze of a young heir who saw her only for her skin color and supposed inferiority. But one day, she uncovered his secret, revealing his insecurities behind the arrogance. This moment changed him forever. Alice Williams, a tall, slender woman in her late 20s, entered the Grand Harrison residence, her smooth chestnut hair pinned in a neat bun, a quiet but determined expression on her face. Her dark skin, radiant against the pristine white of her perfectly pressed uniform, hinted at the resilience she had carried with her all her life. As she crossed the threshold, her large brown eyes swept over the luxurious interiors with a mixture of awe and caution. High vaulted ceilings stretched above her, casting light from grand crystal chandeliers across gleaming marble floors. Ornate gilded frames encased artworks from a world she had only glimpsed in magazines, and elegant furniture was carefully placed in rooms that seemed to breathe opulence and exclusivity. Alice had been raised by her mother with values rooted in dignity, grace, and hard work, carrying herself with a quiet pride that softened but never faltered. She was ready to take on this role with diligence, understanding that this was her chance to secure a future she could be proud of. But even before she had fully settled into her duties, the veneer of charm within this beautiful house began to crack. Matt Harrison, the young heir and master of the estate, carried himself with an air of privilege, a tall and lean figure accustomed to getting his way without question. With piercing blue eyes that seemed to size people up at a glance and a manner both reserved and condescending, Matt radiated an attitude as if the world, along with everyone in it, existed for his comfort. When he first saw Alice in the drawing room, where she had just started her morning routine, his gaze lingered, as if evaluating every inch of her. A smirk slowly formed at the corners of his mouth as he remarked in a detached tone, "I hope you understand that in this house, we expect only the highest standards. I won't tolerate the kind of work you may have gotten away with elsewhere." His voice was calm, each word coated with a subtle but unmistakable disdain, as if she was already guilty of an offense against his pristine world. Alice felt her cheeks flush with the sting of humiliation, a burning urge to say something rising within her, but she bit her lip and held herself back. She reminded herself of her mother's words. Never show them your weakness. Hold your head high. Remember, you have as much right to be here as anyone else. Determined, Alice kept her silence, channeling her anger into each task she performed, refusing to let his scorn rattle her. Every day became an exercise in patience and resilience. Yet, Matt seemed to relish finding new ways to belittle her. He would point out the smallest imperfections, a barely visible fingerprint on a glass, a corner of the floor that didn't shine evenly after hours of scrubbing. With every critique, his gaze grew colder, his smirk more dismissive, as if he enjoyed watching her try and fail to meet his impossible standards. To him, she was nothing more than a servant, another disposable inferior whose presence in his life was a necessary inconvenience. Yet, as the days passed, Alice's frustration simmered under her calm exterior. Weeks passed, and Alice's days turned into a grueling, monotonous marathon. Matt Harrison seemed to make it his personal mission to complicate her life. His demands grew by the day. She now had to clean not only the usual rooms, but also the attic and basement, which hadn't seen a dustcloth in years. She tirelessly scrubbed floors, polished furniture, and washed windows, often working late into the night. All this under Matt's cold, watchful eyes and his taunts about her snail's pace and supposed incompetence. One day, Matt asked her to clean his personal office, a space she had never been responsible for before. She knew his office was his sanctuary, rarely accessed by anyone else. It was lavishly furnished, a massive mahogany desk, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, and a plush armchair from which he often radiated his superiority. While dusting the shelves, her eyes fell on a stack of documents left carelessly on his desk. She wanted to organize them neatly, but the words debt repayment, due date, and risk of asset seizure caught her attention. In that instant, she froze, realizing that these weren't just papers. They were clues to a hidden truth behind his proud exterior. Reading these documents, Alice uncovered that Matt's confidence and arrogance hid a very different story. Financial troubles, threats of foreclosure, pressures from creditors. His perfect life was on the brink of collapse. His business was near ruin, and he was desperately trying to hide it. This unexpected revelation left her with a mix of relief and empathy. For the first time, Alice saw Matt as more than just an arrogant, cruel man. She saw a person driven by fear and insecurity. She realized that his disdainful attitude was likely a cover for his own anxieties, a way to convince himself he was still in control. After a few more days, the tension between Alice and Matt reached a peak. Each morning, as she began her work, the weight of fatigue and simmering anger grew heavier. Matt continued raising his voice, nitpicking her work and asserting his superiority. But one evening, when he started criticizing her yet again for being slow and incompetent, Alice found herself unable to stay silent any longer. She drew upon all the courage she had built up over the weeks and looked him directly in the eyes. Her voice was steady and strong, filled with the conviction she'd held back for too long. "Mr. Harrison," she said, meeting his gaze, "I work in your home and do my job honestly and diligently. Yet you constantly belittle me, find faults in every little thing I do and treat me as if I'm worthless. I won't tolerate it any longer. I am a person, and like anyone else, I deserve respect." Her words shocked Matt. He was taken aback by her boldness and straightforwardness, though his first reaction was one of anger. He was used to having his way, with no one ever daring to speak back. His face flushed as he prepared to retort, but he noticed something in her eyes: fearlessness and resolve. This wasn't a desperate excuse or an attempt to appease him. It was an honest confrontation. "Do you think you deserve respect?" he asked slowly, still incredulous that his employee would challenge him so directly. "Yes," Alice replied firmly. "Every person deserves respect, regardless of the job they do. Perhaps you haven't noticed, because you're so used to looking down on people, but your treatment of others reflects your own fears and insecurities, not theirs." Matt froze, stunned by her words. She had seen the parts of himself he'd hidden from even himself, and it made him uncomfortable. In that moment, he began to realize that all the bitterness and disdain he felt toward others were reflections of his own unresolved fears. Alice, standing before him, suddenly felt less like an employee and more like a mirror, revealing his own weaknesses and fears. Her bravery made him question everything: why he sought validation in tearing others down, why he kept others at a distance. For the first time in a long while, Matt felt something like shame and a need for self-reflection. After that intense conversation, something shifted in Matt's behavior. His sharp gaze and harsh remarks gradually softened. A few days after their conflict, he approached Alice in the hallway. "Alice," he began, averting his eyes, a rarity for him. "I want to apologize. I realize I was unfair and rude to you. There's no excuse for it, but I am genuinely sorry." Alice listened, surprised and a bit skeptical, but she could see he was sincere. She nodded, accepting his words without letting herself get too hopeful. However, from that day on, Matt's attitude did indeed begin to change. One day, he learned that her child was ill, and instead of ignoring it, as Alice might have expected, he offered his help, asking if there was anything he could do to ease her situation. She, used to handling challenges alone, was taken aback, but ultimately accepted his support, touched by his kindness. They began talking more in the evenings when the work slowed down. Matt, slowly opening up, shared his fears and pressures: the debts, the looming bankruptcy, the anxiety that had driven him to act so harshly. In turn, Alice shared her struggles, her journey of overcoming prejudice and humiliation, and the resilience her mother had taught her. Listening to Alice, Matt found himself gaining a new perspective on hardship and humility. She had faced struggles he couldn't imagine, yet carried herself with quiet dignity. Their conversations became a source of learning and healing for both of them. Matt began to view the world and the people around him differently, no longer seeing them as tools to bolster his pride, but as individuals with their own stories, dreams, and pains. Alice became not just a maid, but a friend who saw the person behind the facade. In time, Matt grew to appreciate and respect Alice deeply. His gaze softened with gratitude and respect instead of disdain, and they both found the strength to heal old wounds and set aside past judgments.